Let's look at our big story for today. Just like we've been in business also to shape policy, the World Trade Organization has also been in business for the past 30 years when it comes to shaping global trade and also facilitating trade among nations. When it comes to the issue of poverty eradication, the World Trade Organization has been in the front. But the question is, for the past 30 years, what has been the achievement, the level of success, and some of the challenges that have been encountered by the World Trade Organization in the quest to facilitate global trade and to achieve the Sustainable Development Goal as slated for the year 2030. Let's begin our business of shaping policy in this regard by bringing in our guest analyst. We're being joined by Dr. Oyelami Lukman Oyeyinka, who is a senior lecturer, Economics Unit, Distance Learning Institute, University of Lagos. Dr. Oyeyinka, glad you have you join us this morning.
Good morning. I'm glad to be here, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity present, for me to actually speak to the 30-year anniversary of WTO, which is a very reputable international organization. I'm really glad to be here.
Day. Now let's start our conversation by looking at 30 years of being in business of global trade and poverty eradication. Now you're aware that this organization was created in 1994 with the popular Marrakesh Agreement. But talk to us, what do you think has been the significant achievement or impact of this organization when it comes to global trade, and what are some of the challenges or concerns that have been of serious issues over the years? Talk to us, Dr. Oyeyinka.
Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity again. Basically, the emergence of WTO in 1995, January 1st, and it was born out of a Marrakesh round agreement. But before then, there have always been a general agreement on tariffs and goods, which actually started, which is like a trading system agreement that started in 1948. It predated WTO, and it was actually a trading system that was which WTO basically inherited when at accession in 1995. WTO shadowed with the responsibility of provide a structure for governance of international trade, has achieved a whole lot, and the basic objectives that underline the activities of WTO is actually to provide an enabling environment for international trade in terms of reduction in tariffs, provide a fair trade among countries and the like. These are the mandate of, and to a very reasonable extent, when you look at as at 1995, between 1995 and 2023, WTO has been able to increase the international trade by five folds, meaning that as at 2023 last year, total volume of trade was $30.5 trillion, which is a very huge amount of trade when you look at it. And to a reasonable extent, a whole lot of emerging economies have been given the opportunity to actually participate better in international trade. Unlike what obtained, in 1985, that trade architecture was dominated more by the developed countries like US, the Japans, and the like. A whole lot of countries are coming on board, like China, like the Asian tigers and all of that, and they are actually performing extremely well in international trade. And the major objective of any international trade is not just to trade. Trade is just an activity, but it's actually designed or geared towards reducing poverty. During this same period now, though we may not be able to associate the reduction in poverty, the poverty we are talking of is a collaborative effort of different multilateral organization and even national government to reasonable extent. Because if you are actually key into any international trade or in international activities or in international policy, you must take into cognizance your local, your domestic policy. Is it structured in such a way that you are going to maximize the advantage inherent in such an international trade agreement? Poverty has actually gone down drastically to, and trade by design is actually designed to create a kind of ripple effect within the economy. It's not all about the proceeds country gain from trade. How have you been able to align your domestic policy to actually create an enabling environment to bring about improved welfare for the household within the economies and all of that? This is one of the major key areas where WTO has impacted. Trade has increased, poverty has gone down, though we cannot attribute all of this to activities of the WTO. Other multilateral organizations and domestic governments, have also participated in the whole effort to actually reduce poverty as a whole. But when you are talking of trade, they've been able to provide platform for a fair trade between the developed countries and developing and emerging economy and other developing countries as well. A lot of opportunities have been created for developing countries to actually annex, the resources, domestic resources, to participate effectively and fairly in international trade. And these are, major achievements the country, the WTO has been able to record within this short period of time. And they've also been able to do, to increase what we call global value chain. The global value chain is a part of trade, actually. But it's like, in a kind of a situation, we are in a kind of world where a country can no longer produce everything we need. Let's take, for instance, our phone. Different components of our phone are produced in different parts of the world. And, they just supply based on the comparative advantage of each country. They've been able to produce most of these components. And a country will just sit down somewhere, assemble all these components. And the activities that, that actually usually lead to this kind of production is called global value chain. Mostly, more countries are involved, are participating in global value chain, especially developing countries who are eager to consider, a small player in the global trade. They can now effectively get involved in international trade through participation through GVC. The GVC has increased. Participation of developing countries, especially, has increased in GVC during this period. And these are achievements we can largely attribute. That can largely be attributed to activities of WTO within this short period of time.
For letting us know the roles of the WTO over the years that it's been established. Now, let's pick some of those roles one by one and look at them critically. In terms of creating a new global trade order based on openness, inclusivity, and cooperation, which is the aim upon which the WTO was established. What's your assessment of the WTO's performance? You mentioned facilitating trade between developed nations and developing nations. Looking at that, has that actually been a practical thing done by the WTO over the years?
Yes, the WTO has been able to record substantial gain when it's come to inclusivity, because a lot of policy and activities have been provided for developing countries to actually be more feasible in the global arena when it's come to trade. And let's take, for instance, China. Before now, China was not, Japan was second largest economy after US, and currently now China, by classification of World Bank, China is an emerging economy. But you and I know that China has gone beyond emerging economy, is something else. But countries like China have been able to benefit so much, and countries like African countries, there are several initiatives being put in place by WTO to encourage developing countries, and these are part of their inclusivity agenda, which they've really been working on seriously. A lot of African countries, when you look at countries like South Africa, Nigeria, Namibia, and all of that, they are doing fantastically well in terms of their participation in international trade. And don't forget that many of these countries, without trade, many of the African countries, especially, we depend so much on trade to actually generate revenue, and they require foreign currency to execute domestic policy. Because of their involvement, the improved involvement in international of many developing countries, we've been able to, thanks to the platform provided by WTO, to guarantee a fair trade among, regardless of the size, regardless of the political power or the geopolitical tensions. A whole lot of countries have been able to benefit from it. But nevertheless, it has not been easy. There are challenges. WTO has over 164 countries as member, and they have like 24 government observers. These are countries preparing to join WTO, but they have observed. to actually reach a consensus when it's come to global trade formulations, and their principle is based on consensus. They don't force, they don't impose, and they don't sanction the way the World Bank would do, the way IMF would do. It has not been easy, but they've done so far in this area. We can actually score them very high when it's come to inclusivity and involvement of many developing countries who are eager to consider a small player in international trade. A lot of them are actually benefiting so much from the structure being provided by WTO.
All right, let's do a spotlight on poverty eradication. It's been 30 years of facilitating global trade, which record has shown that it has grown to the tune of $30.4 trillion. Would you say this has made significant impact in eradicating poverty? Why has it been challenging, in spite of the level of global trade, in spite of the level of success, to eradicate poverty or make significant impact in eradicating poverty, most importantly for Africa?
No, the poverty is we can only elevate poverty as experts will say. Poverty may not be eradicated completely, as many experts will allude to. The fact is that it takes more than trade to actually eradicate poverty. There's going to be a synergy between the domestic government, in terms of policy formulation that is designed to, improve the life of the people, and moreover, many countries, their involvement. Let me give you an instance now. The way you approach international trade to really maximize benefits, there are several theories underlying how countries should trade. A lot of countries may not obey they may not obey, they may not trade to their comparative advantage. There is a theory that if you trade to your comparative advantage and you're able to, such a trade will benefit the domestic economy in such a way that it's going to bring a benefit. Let me give you an instance. In case of Nigeria, our comparative advantage should be an agricultural produce. Nigeria should export as much as possible when it comes to agricultural produce and create a value addition. But what we export more is oil. And this oil is an isolated sector of the economy. It's not properly linked to the Nigerian economy. If you don't trade to your advantage, like many other countries, like many other African countries are also doing, they trade in natural resources without any value addition. If you trade to your advantage, create a value addition, you don't just export a raw product like Nigerian will export crude oil and import. No, that's not. Such a trade will not bring about reduction in poverty, because the whole essence is that when you trade substantially, you expand the export trading sector of your economy. You generate more jobs. Jobs is being created. And through these job creations, you're able to reduce poverty substantially. When you're able to, if you don't align your international trade activities to domestic economy, there will be problems. You won't be able to elevate poverty. There will be a disconnect between what to trade and what to do within domestic economy. And this disconnection will not be able to, there won't be a spillover benefit from your trade to the domestic economy in such a way that it's going to generate more jobs, reduce poverty substantially and all of that. If you don't provide necessary linkage between your exporting sector, which we call tradable sectors, and the domestic economy, and that is the situation for many African countries. We basically exports, a raw product without value addition, without generating substantial value addition within the economy to create jobs for, and we have a whole lot of advantage now. We have a very teeming youth, and there's a very high, youth unemployment within the continent. If you don't align your international activities in international trade with the domestic economy in such a way that it can create, an opportunity for people to get jobs and all of that, and by theory, the theory that underlying international trade is basically looking in the direction of that. If country trade, especially with the developed economy, there will be a convergence in terms of wage. And when there's this convergence in terms of trade, what we are saying is that a country with high wage, developed country usually characterized by high wage, while developing countries are usually characterized by low wage. But if you trade with developed country, there's a theory that postulates that there will be a convergence in trade, in wage, and this convergence will bring about, an improved life, poverty reductions in developing countries. But what we witness mostly contradicts this, and this is because of the disconnection between the tradable sector of the economy and non-tradable sector of the economy. And this is not actually bringing about the necessary spillover, necessary advantage created in the external sector, within the domestic economy. And this is actually, look as if, trade is not capable of reducing poverty in many African countries and many other developing countries as well. You have to design your trade activities or your trade policy in such a way that it's going to benefit the domestic economy. That is the way to go to really get the maximum benefits from international trade.
All right. Looking at what the picture you've painted now, talking about countries developing their own trade advantage, but the WTO also has a responsibility towards developing countries in that aspect by providing trainings and technical assistance. In that regard, what's your assessment of the WTO?
Yes. The WTO do that a lot, and I'm one of the beneficiary of, I've participated in several of their MOOC programs, such a way that they build capacity of experts in developing countries to actually design policy to take maximum advantage from international, international trade. They have several programs, and they actually, especially those people in the Ministry of Trade, they train them regularly on capacity building, on how to design, on how to negotiate trade, how to design trade policy, and a whole lot of capacity building programs for experts in developing. They are doing fantastically well in that area. And but what I would just say that they can do better. In recent times, they have, for people in academics like us, they actually provided an opportunity. We call it a WTO chair program. It's a chair program that is being hosted by university to build capacity within the university system, especially the undergraduates who might want to be, go into area of trade. And this capacity building is ongoing. I think University of Lagos will apply for last year. We hope we actually win because it's a competitive process. They have so many programs that have been designed well to build capacity in many, especially in developing countries, to make sure that they're able to negotiate trade properly, and they're able to design domestic policy that will align with their international trade agenda, so that they can maximize the benefits from international trade. They are doing fantastically well in that space.
All right,
but they
Dr.
can do better.
Oyeyinka, we have a soundbite from the Director General of World Trade Organization, that's Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. I would like you to take a listen and then respond afterwards. Just take a listen to the soundbite.
As Director General 3 years ago, I have maintained that for all of the benefits the WTO continues to yield for the lives and livelihoods of people around the world, it must do much more to deliver on its founding mandate to raise living standards, create jobs, and promote sustainable development. It must deliver more for people. Reforming and reinvigorating the WTO is about more than simply keeping it fit for purpose amid 21st century business realities. It is about leveraging the full power and potential of trade to make a difference for people's lives. We have been moving in the right direction. At our 12th Ministerial Conference in June 2022, all 164 members of the WTO came together across geopolitical fault lines to deliver consensus agreements on curbing billions of dollars in harmful fishery subsidies, on pandemic response, and on exempting food aid from export restrictions.
All right, Dr. Oyeyinka, I'm sure you heard the Director General of World Trade Organization talking about some of the significant impact over the years. Specifically, she talked about the fact that the 164 members, we've been able to reach consensus as regards handling the issue of pandemic and also the issue of poverty eradication. But my question is, in the area of addressing this disparity or the economic disparity that could have existed between the 164 members, do you think the World Trade Organization has been playing a significant role in addressing this issue, especially when it comes to the issue of trade disputes? You're aware of what is happening between China and US as regards the issue of tariffs and production of electric vehicles. How much of impact or success has the World Trade Organization recorded in the area of facilitating trade or addressing the issue of trade disputes among its 164 members?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I want you to know that in every multilateral organization, there will be some level of hegemony. Why some country will be too big, why some will be too small, and on the like. US is a big player when it comes to world trade and is the biggest economy in the world, followed by China and the like. Dispute resolutions both of them are part of WTO. There is the way, as I said earlier, the way WTO approach the business of negotiation is consensus, is by consensus. They don't impose, they don't, all the country must come into an agreement as regard what the policy, what the system they want to operate at every point in time. But in terms of dispute resolutions, it has been a very big problem, especially when such disputes involve big economies like US and China. They may not be able to resolve such disputes in a very, very quick manner that people will expect. And despite the fact that many of these countries belong to WTO, WTO does not have a final say when it comes to some imposition of tariffs and all that. Though many of them are signatory to this agreement, just like United Nations, just like we experienced United Nations, where some countries like US, Russia are big. The same thing is happening among the WTO members. Some countries are big, and because of their size, they dominate the activities of WTO as well. And they can, they may not be able to, the disputes between these countries may not be easily come. Like, there's a current increase of tariff on China automobile industry, both electric and non-electric in Europe country. Now, this should not be ordinarily without the consent of WTO. But many of these big countries and big, they take decision independent of the WTO. And it's up to China to come to use the dispute resolution mechanism being provided within the WTO to resolve such issues. The first thing is that China will launch a complaint to WTO, and they will initiate through the process of complaint initiations. The WTO will use their mechanism to take it up. Though in most cases it may not really come, it may not be an easy thing to resolve. Though it may lead to trade war because China is also at liberty to retaliate. Though it's going to compromise, the international trade rules, but it's something WTO has been grappling with in most cases. Though, but to some extent, they've been able to settle disputes, but in some cases, it's not always easy to achieve.
All right, let's look at the current situation globally where we have geopolitical tensions and geoeconomic fragmentations. How has this impacted WTO's aim to improve trade and also reduce poverty? Hear me?
Yeah, I did hear you. Come again. Come again.
My question is this. The WTO has the aim of actually improving trade and reducing poverty. So how has the current situation where we have geopolitical tensions and also geoeconomic fragmentation impacted the achievement of this aim?
Yeah, it's always a very big challenge for WTO because this geopolitical tension is, look at Ukraine, Russia, for instance. Look at the impact on the wheat productions and grain productions globally. Geopolitical tension is inimical to achievement, to objectives of free flow trade, and this has contributed, massively to inability of WTO and many multilateral organizations to achieve a poverty reductions objectives. And even the proceeds from trade has been the major source of income for many of these countries, despite their geopolitical tensions. You see, divert the resources, the very expensive resources, to trade in arms, because when there is tension, most of these countries will go into they buy arms and ammunition from different countries of the world instead of goods and commodities that can actually improve the life of the people. Well, all of this, they actually have a negative impact on the poverty reduction objectives of WTO, and it actually hamper trade, in a great way.
Dr. Oyeyinka, it is often said that there are two sides to a coin. As much as we are celebrating the achievements of World Trade Organization for the past 30 years, there are challenges. I would like you to identify some of these limitations or constraints that WTO must have encountered over the years. Perhaps some of these things could be hampering its achieving its aims and objectives. What do you think they are?
Yeah, like the last question, geopolitical tension is one of the major problems. And another thing is that there's what we call bilateral trade agreements like FTA. You know, the principle that underline WTO is is principle of fairness to all member countries. But in some cases, some country come into an agreement. We call it FTA, which most of these FTA, like we have African Continental Free Trade Agreement and all of that, they affect, or they in a way they are not in conformity with WTO principle. Though they are designed to promote trade among the member who are signatory to that agreement. Let me give you an instance. In the case of ECOWAS now, we are trying to promote a free trade among the ECOWAS member, but there's no way it will lead to discriminations. We call it discriminative trade. Any non-ECOWAS member country that want to export to any of the ECOWAS member countries, they have to pay higher tariff than what an ECOWAS member country will pay. And that is a discriminative tariffs. And most of these FTA, they lead to what we call discriminative trade. And this is one of the major challenges being faced by WTO. And the challenge of what's it called, geopolitical tension, as I said, and the hegemony of the big country like US, like Britain, China, and all of this. They are major challenge to attainment of WTO objectives. These are major challenges, and in the recent times, we are having though we can say that many of the developing countries, they are becoming more involved in decision making at the global level, and they are getting more active. They are becoming more active in international, like country like Kenya now. Many of them are becoming more active in the global arena, and because of that, we can say that despite the challenges, they are still gradually making wave, or they are gradually succeeding in incorporating many of these small countries. But the challenges are enormous. The proliferation of FTA. That's we call it free trade agreement among developing countries, even among the developed countries like NAFTA, like Europe, EU, and all of this. They are inimical to to objective of fair trade, being the principle of fair trade that underline the activities of WTO. There are several challenges and inability of WTO to actually promote a beneficial trade to many of developing countries. Like Nigeria now, we trade normally like every other country, but are we trading to our strengths? That is our problems. That is a domestic problem. But we can actually anchor it on WTO, challenges, because in as much you don't trade in a manner that you're able to benefit your people, that you're able to improve the welfare of the people within the country, it's a big challenge. And it's actually, it's not in conformity with the attainment of the objective of WTO.
You stated that the WTO relies on consensus amongst its members.
Yes.
Does this mode of operation limit its effectiveness because it's an organization that doesn't impose sanctions? What's your take on that?
Now, it's not that it doesn't impose sanctions. The sanction that WTO imposes is going to be uniformly agreed among members, and members are left to their discretion whether to implement that sanctions or not. That nevertheless render that sanction ineffective in a way at some point. And that's just the way. That's the principle that underlines this, and it's a principle of fairness for everybody's and the like. And nevertheless, it contributes to ineffectiveness of many of the decision making at the level of WTO.
going forward? Do you think there is a need for a review of some of WTO's policies at this point, given how some countries have shown disrespect for the WTO's rules and the way trade now runs amongst countries? Should there be a review of some of these policies?
Yeah, so some of this policy, there's a need for review. There's a need for review, and some of the principle may not hold in these contemporary times, given the proliferation of FTA we have now. Many of the countries, especially developing countries, they are, bringing themselves into groups to organize, to implement free trade agreements among themselves as part of the effort to promote trade among them. And this can, affect the principle of we call it non-FIFO countries within WTO. There is need to review some of these principles to make them in line with the current realities, in the global world, and that will actually improve their operations and see what how they can contribute more to the poverty reductions, which is one of their key objectives.
Now, Dr. Oyeyinka, earlier you said something quite significant, which is the fact that Nigeria should hang its global trade initiative on the World Trade Organization. Interestingly, the Director General, the President Director General, she's a Nigerian. If you're not going to presume that my question will sound selfish, do you think Nigeria should take advantage of having its own as the Director General in getting the right comparative advantage or when it comes to global trade? And what areas do you think Nigeria can also maximize this opportunity in getting the right attention needed to set the narrative for its growth and development?
That's a very good question. When we have one of our own currently as a Director General of WTO, and at that time, Nigerian government played a very dominant role to ensure our emergence. But the regard is that, there's a laid down principle, there's a structure, there's institutional arrangements that may inhibit the woman to achieve so much for Nigeria. But the fact remains that most of the trade policy we all know, experts know the direction, what is our comparative advantage. The emergence of oil, in such a way that Nigeria now become an oil dominant country, I would not say it's not a blessing as far as I'm concerned. That's my personal opinion. Currently Nigeria is not trading, to our, based on comparative advantage. We might see oil as being a comparative advantage, but we are not even maximizing the benefits from this oil. It is up to the local experts to formulate and design a policy in conjunction with government. Government must also be ready to implement some of this policy to really promote trade that is beneficial to Nigerian people. There's little or nothing this woman can do. After her office, she will resign or she will retire and do something else. It is incumbent on Nigerian government and the policymaker within the Nigerian space, within trade space in Nigeria, to advise government, and government must see reason why we need to diversify Nigerian economy. People have been saying it's like a usual rhetoric. There's a need we have a very youthful populations. We have a very high unemployment, youth unemployment. For us to really maximize, we must diversify this economy. We can no longer rely on oil to finance government activities, to earn foreign exchange. We must seriously, the time is not, there's no better time to achieve this. The Director General can provide the capacity building, local capacity building to develop, different, sectors that can actually generate ripple effects for the Nigerian economy as a whole, but there's limit to what she can do. There's a limit to what she can do. Nigerian government, the policymaker within the Nigerian space should see it as a genuine agenda, a serious agenda to diversify Nigerian economy and to provide alternative for oil. There's no better time than now. We have comparative advantage. Nigeria is a labor endowed country. We have over 200 million population, and less than half of this population, they are under 35 or 45 thereabout. That's a youthful population. We can actually expand other sectors, expand our agriculture. Let's go seriously into agriculture. Let's add value. Let's see agriculture as a business rather than a subsistence farming. Let's export goods. Let's add values to our local products. Let's generate value from our local products. Let's expand them, create more jobs. That's the way to go. And this is where this agriculture is a sector that can employ huge labor, because it's a labor require a labor, we call it a sector that require more labor to generate products. We can actually, if you expand this sector, we're going to generate more employment. People should not see farming as a dirty job. The youth will also go. As long as we are able to generate enough revenue from this sector that can take care of the people, people will go into agriculture. People will go into rural area. What's it in the city that we are getting? People can go into rural area, expand our agricultural base, export them, add value to our cocoa and other products that we easily produce. We have comparative advantage in this area, and that is the only area we can actually generate more jobs, reduce poverty for country. Not oil. Oil is an isolated sector of the Nigerian economy. It's not properly linked. It does not generate ripple effect in terms of employment creations and the likes, unlike what agriculture will do for us. Let's open up the agricultural sector in Nigeria. Let's add more value to our local product so that we can generate more employment along the value chain of many of these products. And by then, we'll substantially reduce the unemployment we have in this country. There's limit to what the woman can do, but the policymaker within the Nigerian political space and their advisors, they can do much more than we are doing currently to actually, engender a beneficial trade for the whole country. That's the way to go.
In our sectors, let's also look at other sectors that have not really benefited from the WTO. For instance, intellectual property. Yes, the WTO has agreements that cover that area, but there's also an argument by developing nations that the agreements tend to favor developed countries. For instance, when it comes to pharmaceutical industries and technology industries.
But it's very simple question, because what level of innovation do we have in the developing countries? And it is when you innovate that you patent your innovations. There's the expenditure or the involvement of many developing countries into research and development is next to nothing. And if you don't innovate and you don't invent things, what's the importance of intellectual property to you? Many of these, when you look at many of the developed countries, they set aside a huge amount of money for research and development. Though the African country, especially, or developing country, they can also leverage on their apps and the likes. But many of them, they are not been scientifically proven. Their efficacy have not been scientifically established. And that makes it very difficult for them to patent registration of your intellectual property. It's a procedure, and it's a scientific-based procedure. Many of the developing countries, they do not have the capacity to patent even the little product they have, because it has to undergo a basic scientific certifications, which many of them, do not, whether they are not aware or they don't have the capacity to do. Many of the developed countries, if care is not taken, they will continue to dominate the developing country when it comes to intellectual property, because they spend more on research and development, they innovate more, and they can actually patent. They stand to benefit more, especially in the pharmaceutical country, in the pharmaceutical industry. The few space where African country or some developing country can even operate, they do not have the money to invest heavily in their scientific analysis to actually patent those products and sell it to the global world and prove their efficacy to the global world. Because you can't say that, okay, I have a headache, I take apps, the headache goes. Why? What is the assurance that the next time I take the apps, the headache will go? There must be a scientific proof to that effect. And that's if you don't invest in research and development, you cannot have all of that. And that is why developed countries continue to dominate in this space. Though we can't say that the improvement, we're having some improvement from emerging countries and other developing countries when it comes to innovations as well, and their involvement in patency and intellectual property. It's a gradual process, but we are not there yet. The dichotomy between developed countries and developing countries is still very active in this area.
All right, let's wrap up our conversation by looking at the role of WTO when it comes to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. The deadline set is the year 2030. You are 6 years away from 2030. What do you think WTO can do differently to facilitate achieving these targets?
Yes, that's a very good question. That's a very good one. Most of the goal in the Sustainable Development Goal, they are actually designed to help poor countries and developing countries. And because of that, if WTO can provide more trading advantage to many of the developing country and developed country, and they're able to generate enough revenue from trade, this will go a long way, in achieving Sustainable Development Goal in many of these countries. Because if there's no other way, even with borrowing from World Bank and IMF, there's little to what they can achieve, when it comes to attainment of Sustainable Development Goal. WTO can provide more trading advantage, more trading opportunity for many of them, and they can also help them to build capacity in such a way that they can align their international trade goal with their domestic policy in such a way that such a trade would be beneficial. Let's look at the zero hunger as one of Sustainable Development Goal, for instance. Now, as long as the country is not generating enough revenue and is not building opportunity it's not expanding opportunity from international trade, it's not extending opportunity from international trade to the domestic market, they may not be able to achieve zero hunger. There will continue to be hunger in the land as long as people don't have a sustainable means of job, a reliable means of income. By providing opportunity more to developing country, let them trade more, let them align their international trade agenda with their domestic goals, with their microeconomy objectives, so that they'll be able to generate improved welfare for their people and increase the wage for their people. And this can actually bring about attaining a Sustainable Development Goal in many of these developing countries.
I must thank you very much for your time on Early Exchange today. It's been a wonderful conversation with you.
Thank you. Same. Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Early Exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.